Harrison Price from Wall Center and a presentation of Audi downtown Vancouver.
Audi downtown Vancouver, the corner of Burrard and 2nd. Audi downtown Vancouver.ca as well. Inventory available up and down the lineup. Call ahead, or better yet, drop by and talk to a sales associate there. Find out what they can do for you right now at Audi downtown Vancouver.
Bodog poll question today. Are you satisfied with the Canucks' moves on day one of free agency? We will put it to our next guest, Jeff Patterson. Bodog line of the day for me. That big battle of unbeatens in the Canadian Football League on Friday. I'm going to take the 4 points with Calgary in Winnipeg on your Bodog line of the day. Here he is, our Canucks reporter, one half of the rink-wide duo with Andrew Wadden in the Go-Goat Sports studio. Pleasure to see Mr. Jeff Patterson. How are you?
I'm good. Still trying to process all that's gone on. It's been a busy day, far busier than I anticipated. I thought the Canucks were just going to be nibbling around the fringes, so I did not see a contract like the one that they doled out for Ilya Mikheyev.
What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, I like the speed, obviously, and we knew that was shortcoming in this hockey club. Travis Green lamented it. Bruce Boudreau took over. It was one of his observations. Jim Rutherford, Patrick Alvin, they all know that this team wasn't fast enough, and there are few players, if any, in a straight line. I mean, maybe McDavid. But there are few players in the National Hockey League that get from A to B quicker than Ilya Mikheyev. The question is, can his hands keep up with his feet? That's been the issue, that he creates a ton of offensive chances, doesn't have a lot of finish, but he did have a season last year, and it netted in this contract. And look, how many shows did we do where we wondered, once they had Kuzmenko in the fold, is the door open to more Russians? Kuzmenko, an Ann Milstein client, I do wonder if the plan that they laid out and the pitch that they made to Andrei Kuzmenko
involved Mikheyev.
Was like, here, has that little handbook, pass this along to Ilya when he's ready to make a decision, because it just kind of feels like there is through line here from Kuzmenko, the agent, and now Mikheyev.
With Podkolzin already hunkered down here, too.
Mix as well, yeah.
Yeah, well, 3 follow-ups there. Number one, he was a primary penalty killer for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we know that penalty killing has been an issue for the Vancouver Canucks. Number 2, as this guy pointed out almost as soon as we heard the news and went through the player a whole bit, there's a lot of Jannik Hansen similarities here. A guy who can play and create chances, just doesn't finish.
I mean, the lament of the Leaf fan is the amount of breakaways with the lack of finish, and boy, is that Jannik Hansen. But, I mean, that doesn't mean that isn't a useful player. I mean, what did we say about Jannik Hansen back in the day? We already liked the player. We again just lamented that lack of finish, but he still did a lot. The Honey Badger still created things. You wonder too if this is Honey Badger 2.0.
You win with players like Jannik Hansen. He was one of my favorites here. Let me just ask you this, Jeff. The other winger they were tied to was Mason Marchment in Florida, who wound up signing in Carolina for $250,000 less per year on the same term. It's about a year younger than Mikheyev. They're both left shooters. Marchment had 3 fewer goals at 18 last year, but 47 points to Mikheyev's 32. Should say Marchment not a penalty killer, although potentially a power play option. Looking at those two, do you think they made the right choice?
Yeah, I think for this team, if it's one or the other there, and I think it's really important context to keep in mind that the Leafs and Florida were both 2 of the highest scoring teams in the National Hockey League, so you do have to wonder, are these artificially inflated totals? And look, I'll give Mikheyev every opportunity. I think he's going to get every opportunity here. I think the Canucks see him as a top 6 guy, so they're banking on that 21 goals, to be in that ballpark at the very least. Mason Marchment, again, last year was such an outlier season for him that feels like it's got a few more red flags. I think there's a few more tools in the toolbox maybe for Mikheyev here. The one thing with Mikheyev is 3 years in the NHL, he's never played more than 54 games. So I think you prorate his totals from last year, there might be the potential there if he does play top 6. If he gets some power play time, he's not going to be on the first unit power play. We'll see where it goes. But again, I didn't think they were in the ballpark for this kind of player. So I like him. I mean, again, this team had to get faster. They do get faster with Mikheyev. It's just a question of this isn't Toronto. The Canucks don't score nearly as many goals as the Leafs did last year, and was he a product of his environment?
What about the crowded nature of the forwards?
Yeah.
On the wing.
Yeah, the wings in particular. Yeah. I mean, depth is great, but are you suspicious of the depth considering where this team is at? Usually this is what you do when you're trying to contend is you start to stack as much, but now this seems awfully lopsided considering the lack of depth on the blue line.
Right. So as it stands right now with JT Miller still in the fold and a big part of what the Vancouver Canucks have for the moment, I like their forward group. Like there's a lot to like. The addition of Kuzmenko, I think Elias Pettersson's going to have a better season. I think you're going to see more start to finish from Elias Pettersson like the second half of last season. Brock Besser with his contract done now, and the family struggles, obviously, that weighed on him. I think he's going to be free of mind to have a more productive season. I think Bud Colson, you forget about Nils Höglander. He's sort of a forgotten man in all of this. What it does, though, I mean, we've been saying for a while now that Tanner Pearson at the age of 30, at the stage of his career, shouldn't be in your top six if you're a competitive team. And that's not a knock on Tanner Pearson. It's just that as they assemble more talent, he should get squeezed. Now, he might get squeezed right out of the picture entirely, but as we assess this here right now, day one of free agency, they've still got all these players. Like I would go lotto line, and then you'd have a second line of perhaps Mikheyev and Garland with Horvat in the middle. Now you're talking about Pearson in the third line. Third line center is still a bit of a concern because I think of Curtis Lazar, and we'll talk about him in a sec. I think of him being brought in as a fourth line center, and yet he was more productive than Jason Dickinson was last year. So Dickinson's still a little bit of a black hole there and a reclamation project. But, all of a sudden now we're looking at Kuzmenko maybe on the third line to start at the very least. And then, as it stands right now, I mentioned Höglander.
Höglander and Podkolzin could be the fourth line wingers right now, Jeff.
Well, it's possible. I mean, it does open the door for a guy like Will Lockwood if they want to get faster and a little chippier. I think he has to see this as an opportunity, and it's go time for him at 24 now to prove that he's an everyday National Hockey Leaguer. But yeah, I mean, all those players there, they've got options, they've got depth, they've got a blue chip stud in goal. And then there's that position in the middle. That
I will strike if Vasily Podkolzin is on the fourth line. After his finish of the season,
where do you think
Tanner, you do not defer to Tanner Pearson, for heaven's sakes. An aging Tanner Pearson with his skill set, that's a third or fourth line, not Vasily Podkolzin.
Podkolzin better have a good summer and a good camp, though.
Yeah.
I would think. Particularly, Pearson wasn't bad last year in the games that he played. So do you think they'll play Miller at the middle then? Like, I'm sitting here. I got to $81.4 million, Jeff, on a roster of 23, which includes 13 forwards, including Michael Furland, because you want to keep Furland and then apply the LTI or after you set your opening night. I kept Dermott and Rathbone as 7th and 8th defensemen rather than keep Lockwood as a 14th forward, but really there's not much change there. Plus the two goaltenders, the overages with Yarrow Halak's bonuses, and then the buyouts of Holtby. So that brings them right flush to the cap.
Right.
That could be the opening night roster if there's no trades from here.
Yeah, and I think that there are still some shoes to drop. But as we're working with what we have to work with, if you're putting a depth chart together, I'm going to have lotto line. Like, I'm just going to load up and put three of my best players up front. I've got Miller back on the wing. I think Pettersson, his utility and his true value to the hockey club is as a centerman now, but moving forward as well. I want to put him in a position to succeed, to hit the ground, and get off to a way better start. Besser needs a better start as well. So if this is the way that they arrive at training camp, I'd go lotto line, and then I think you could experiment a little bit, but Horvat, and maybe Mikheyev stretches the ice a little bit, frees up Bo Horvat then to roam around and create some offense, and Garland can dart in and out. I think those could be your top six, but...
That'd be like an anarchy line, those three together.
You're right. A little bit of misfit, but maybe it works. Who knows? I was really encouraged by what I saw from Podkolzin down the stretch. So I think that he probably should be expected to take another step here and move forward. And then Kuzmenko's a wild card, but they've got him. And I think that there's a player there, certainly. Where he slots in, though, your guess is as good as mine. And then Höglander, as I said, he's kind of the forgotten man. He had such a good rookie season. Last year was a step back, but lots of guys take that step back in their second year, so I'm not writing off Nils Höglander. In fact, if you had Curtis Lazar and Nils Höglander together on a fourth line, those guys could be a pain in the butt to play against in sheltered situations. And this is why I saw some people pushing back about teams stepping away from Matthew Highmore and Juho Lammikko because people like those guys. But you can't fall in love. Fans cannot. Well, fans can fall in love with players, but organizations can't. And if you can improve around the edges, and I do think that they had to shake up the composition of their fourth line. They needed a right shot center. They could not go through another season without it's not even a luxury. If you're talking about proper roster construction in the NHL, you got to have somebody that can take faceoffs on the right side. Lazar led the Boston Bruins in hits last year. I do think that he brings a little bit more jam and edge than Lammikko and Highmore. So fans can like those players, but we saw it. Like, the market has been flooded with depth players, and I think the Canucks say, Curtis Lazar, 27, 28, and 29-year-old seasons. Like, he'll just have turned 30 when this contract expires. To get him from 27 to 29 at $1 million per, that, to me, is an upgrade on what they had. I think that this fourth line has the potential just to be a little edgier and a little more dynamic than guys like Lammikko and Highmore that played, but they really didn't leave any sort of mark on opponents. I don't think anybody would tell you that those guys were terribly difficult to play against as opponents.
No, I think you're right, and he can bury the entirety of Lazar's salary if need be, so they gave him a little bit of extra term.
But why did everybody love Luke Schenn? Because he had a little bit of attitude, right? And you need a little bit of attitude elsewhere in the lineup. So if Lazar
wasn't attitudinal enough,
he was not attitudinal. No, pretty vanilla.
Really interesting. First of all, Lazar is one of the great speakers in the NHL. Like, he's going straight into a broadcast booth when he's done talking. We've known this for some time. But interesting that a one-time first-round pick and Canadian World Junior, he was the 17th overall pick to the Ottawa Senators in 2013.
Which was the Bo Horvat
draft, right. So he went, 8 picks after Bo. Yep. His comment about at 19, he pretty much had junior figured out, couldn't play the AHL, so wound up sticking in the NHL with the Senators, where it was just 15 points in 67 games. By the next year, my friends in Ottawa were telling me, the organization is sort of souring on Lazar a little bit. I was like, really? Already? But he mentioned, he needed AHL seasoning then.
Yeah.
And he also mentioned that he wound up getting it in 2018, 2019 after he had put 4 NHL seasons in. He spent a full year in the AHL, and that's pretty much what helped him salvage his NHL career here. It got him to Buffalo, which got him to Boston. And, of course, we've also had 2 expansion teams come in, which has created jobs for another 25 or so forwards. So, really, we're talking about a guy who's on a second or third NHL life here.
I always say the guys that are taken as first-rounders, most of it is because of their hockey skill, but a lot of it can be their hockey IQ as well, and that doesn't go away. The skills may diminish, the ask of the player, the role that he's in, the situation, some of that can change, but the hockey IQ, that shouldn't diminish. And I think if a guy is smart enough to recognize what's going to keep him in the league, he's been willing to play that role. He's not scoring a ton of goals. He's not getting millions of dollars, but he's keeping himself in the National Hockey League and get some term, and so it's taken him it's been a windy road. He's not the only guy that's ever gone down this path, obviously, but yeah, I mean, he's another perfect argument, I think, against this NHL-CHL agreement that I just feel so strongly that NHL teams should be allowed to play one wild card every 5 years or something where they can take a first-round pick and place him in the American Hockey League to continue his development.
I would just say first-round picks, period. Every year, because the first-round pick is the one that I think is most jeopardized here.
But guys at the back end of the first round, a lot of them need another year of junior.
Sure.
But
you're not obligated,
no,
though.
right.
Yeah.
You're saying for the discretion of the team.
Yeah.
And I get that junior operators need to sell tickets to business and they want their stars still, but it just feels like there are guys that are too good to go back to junior, should be allowed to play in the American Hockey League. So, this rule was put in place years and years and years ago. Guys are so much better prepared now. They come out of junior pro ready with the training and the sports specific, the science, I do wish that the league and the CHL could revisit that and find some way to tweak it to help the development of certain players, and I think Lazar is a great example of that.
Alas, if I'm not mistaken, I think they just re-upped the CHL agreement last year, right? So looks like a bad developmental system, or at least wrinkle within the system that we're going to have to live with.
Are you amazed at the costs of defensemen out there and what the market is? I mean, it's escalated.
Yeah, and it started early with Josh Manson re-signing with the Colorado Avalanche. And I was looking because I know Jim Rutherford was quoted yesterday as saying he recognizes the defense here needs work, but could be a couple of years.
Yes.
And again, you don't want to be wasting seasons of Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson and Thatcher Demko. And this is I get that Jim Rutherford and Patrick Arline are still new in their jobs, and people can say, hey, patience. But the flip side of that is it's a fan base that has been patient for so long, too long. And this dark decade they've had to endure, people don't want to be patient.
And Rutherford referenced that yesterday, too. So I think he is conscious of the fact that his timeline and the fans' timeline may not align right now.
But just to your question, Blake, so Josh Manson, it cost Colorado a second-rounder and Drew Helleson, who was a legitimate prospect.
And a right-handed defense prospect. There's very few
So that
of
was
those.
the acquisition cost. Manson comes in. They win a Stanley Cup. So, hey, they've got the cup. Nobody can take that away from them. But to re-sign a 30-year-old Josh Manson 4x4.5, so the acquisition cost and then the charge to get him and keep him in the fold, that's what you're looking at.
And Jeff,
today's prices.
I think he probably took a discount to stay with the Cup champion.
It's possible.
Like, I would bet there were 5-year deals or $5 million deals out there to go somewhere else.
I thought that was actually kind of fair.
I actually thought it was.
Given where that normally goes, given what Eric Goodbranson got.
So it makes it that much clearer how difficult it's going to be for the Vancouver Canucks, but I also wonder in the same breath, like Tyler Myers at $6 million as a cap hit doesn't look totally out of line with some of the contracts that are out there. But keep in mind with Tyler Myers, it's far less money out and owed than the cap hit. And I do wonder if that will make him a little more attractive in terms of a trade market around the National Hockey League. Of course, the Canucks need somebody to play and play the right side and eat those minutes. So it's never simple when you're talking about Tyler Myers, but his contract right now doesn't look outrageous when you see what some guys are able to command on this first day of free agency.
I've been telling you guys for months, he's got trade value, and he may have even more trade value in season next year if he continues to perform, because there's even less term and money left on the deal. Jeff, it's $5 million this year as a base salary. It's a $5 million bonus next year. So this day next year, they'll pay him, somebody will pay him $5 million, but then it's just $1 million in base salary after that. I'm glad you asked the defense question, Blake, and particularly on the right side, because I charted here the right side defenseman, and not all these guys were unrestricted free agents. But, you go down to Tampa where they got two good ones in Sergachev and Chernak. They both commanded the maximum 8-year extension. Tony DeAngelo, with all his baggage, is a $5 million player. Chris Letang at 35 years old got a 6-year deal at 6.1. Yanni Ruta got a 3-year deal at just under $3 million as a 32-year-old. I understand why the Canucks were linked to Ilya Lyubushkin, because it was 1 year at 2.75 for a 28-year-old, and that's reasonable. I mean, he's not a great player, but that's a reasonable contract.
He's got to talk to his
He's got to talk to his agent.
Yeah, exactly.
He is upset right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, Jeff, we saved the best for last year. Eric Goodbranson gets 4 years, $4 million per as a 30-year-old in Columbus.
If you had told us when he departed the Vancouver Canucks,
he would sign a multi-year extension
for
several years
for
later,
a cap north of 4, I mean, we would have called each other crazy for that.
But the question here is, Jeff, and look, it's a function of them not being able to clear cap space, and Rutherford said yesterday, not ideal. We'd hope to move more cap space by now. Another signpost, another opportunity has come and gone to rebuild the defense, and the Vancouver Canucks, outside of, what's his name? Kalanick, who's a left side guy anyways, did nothing.
Right. And so as it stands right now, they're going into a season with OEL, Tyler Myers, Luke Schenn, all on the wrong side of 30. Tucker Poolman, if he is healthy, turns 30, and it's if he's healthy. They're not getting any younger. And so when we talk about Tyler Myers, you have to hope that he can play somewhere close to where he did last season, but that may be a big ask. And OEL, at some point, the worm's going to turn there, and he's going to start to slow down, and they're going to be on the hook for that contract for years and years and years and years. Just quickly on Goodbranson, I will never begrudge the player. If he can get that, take it and run. The thing that still can't get over, and now you add Columbus to this list, he left Vancouver, and I wondered if he was on his last chance in the NHL. He got traded to Pittsburgh for Tanner Pearson. Since he left Vancouver, Eric Goodbranson has played for Pittsburgh, Anaheim, Ottawa, Nashville, Calgary, and now is able to command $16 million from the Columbus Blue Jackets. It only takes one.
Yep.
And I'm sure he'll go in there and he will say all the right things and he'll look good doing it and he'll sell the game in Columbus, Ohio. But he's being paid to play ultimately. And I think the Blue Jackets are going to find that contract probably does not age well starting tomorrow.
And our buddy John Shannon reported that Columbus was looking for more toughness.
And that's what they got.
That's why they paid.
Are you confident at all the Canucks do get another defenseman this summer? Or do you think they're just going to resign themselves to that this is what they got?
Again, I've said for a while that I feel that the JT Miller deal has to set them up in some way on defense. And, could they do a player swap? Could Connor Garland fetch them a defenseman? Possibly, if they feel that there's a surplus. And so I think there are some avenues here. I'm not going to make a any sort of blanket statement until I see the lineup that they show up at training camp. But if they think that coming to camp with Luke Shen as Quinn Hughes' partner and a top 4 guy, again, Bruce Boudreau is coaching for his coaching life here. Like, there is high stakes for him to have success. And again, I don't want to see them waste like prime years of some of these good young players. And they owe it to these good young players to surround them.
Well, and Jeff, if next year winds up being wasted, you're in a boat where you're looking to extend Elias next year with 1 year left as an RFA to be with Arbrights coming off of 7.35. So, yeah, I mean, the stresses only get bigger as we go forward here. Horvat, need to...
A JT Miller trade, too, guys, might be a pick and a prospect involved rather than a roster player. So you may not get better with the JT Miller trade immediately.
Well, and the other thing, too, people have sort of resigned themselves to the fact that, last resort, he could be a rental. Claude Giroux, and I know Claude Giroux is a little further along in the aging curve, but Claude Giroux was the big fish that moved at this past deadline. They got Owen Tippett, who hasn't hit as a 10th overall pick in his draft year. They got
still some potential there, though. It's pretty much just a shooter, goal scorer, but yeah.
But
it's not a sure thing, no.
Right. And the first-round pick that Philly got from Florida is a 2024 first-rounder. So would you be okay with sort of,
50-50 prospect
that kind of had the luster off him, and a first-rounder, like 2025 first-rounder?
That's not even a year, is it?
We're talking about Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes and Thatcher Demko all in their wheelhouse, and we're talking about a 2025 first-rounder?
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing, guys. I wonder whether the time has passed that they would accept a pick and a prospect, even if it's a very good prospect for JT Miller.
Meaning what?
Well, meaning that if you're going to take that for Miller, part of the return, part of the strategy would be to take the 5 1/4 and reinvest it in someone in free agency. Well, I mean, I suppose you could still go out and sign free agents. There are still guys out there, but I just don't think you're getting quality enough NHL players for that 5 1/4 from this point forward. You would have going into today. So I do wonder whether now the heat is on to absolutely get an NHL player and absolutely, to quote him, get a right side defenseman with the single best trade asset that you've got.
I suppose another option would be if Kuzmenko hits, if early on it's apparent that this guy can play.
Yes.
Does that make Connor Garland perhaps a little more redundant? And could you take the $4.9 million that you're paying Connor Garland for the next bunch of years and find a defenseman who's on that same sort of ticket in that age range that can play and just reallocate some of the money? And I do think that that's an avenue that they're going to have to look at, because there will be teams out there that struggle out of the gates, that need some scoring, that are trying to shake things up. And I just wonder, and look, I think Connor Garland will have a better second season than he did his first. I think adjusting to change and a hockey market and all that kind of stuff, he had a pretty slow first season, let's be honest. And I think we saw, he was the first to tell you that. I think he'll be better. I think the expectations should be better on him. I just don't know, when we talk about this sort of depth that they've assembled, if he's a fit here and if he's not better served as a trade chip to play to try to address.
Garland and Besser both having good starts to the season might be what the Canucks need to get something by midseason in terms of...
Well, I think they've got to turn a winger into
that's what I'm saying.
A defenseman.
That's what I'm saying.
I think they got to do it before the season, Blake. Could you go into the season with this group? Yeah, I think you could. But Rutherford said yesterday he expects when the dust settles, the trade market will heat up. He figured about a couple weeks. I know we've been telling Canucks fans that for months and months.
I just think you're trading low on Besser. You're trading low on Garland based on just his goal totals last year. And Kuzmenko's too much of a wild card to know if he can be a replacement or anything close to a replacement for either of those guys.
Dreger's tweet, and we know that Dreger has a relationship to some degree with Jim Rutherford in terms of a source. He says the Canucks know they've improved up front, but recognize they have to upgrade their blue line. They intend to do that via trade and will need time to develop their possibilities. So that's coming, I would think, from the office themselves, saying exactly what we just said. So, they're resigned to that.
So what I would ask in conclusion here, Jeff, are the Vancouver Canucks off season, are they still on plan B or have they moved to plan C here? Because we're not on plan A. I think that much is clear.
I'd agree with you there. I'll still give them the latitude of being on plan B.
Okay.
But you hear that? That's plan C calling.
Plan C, line 1.
That's plan C's train coming down the track here.
Exactly.
C arrives.
Waterfront Station. Thank you for this, my friend. We'll catch up with you tomorrow.
You bet.